Okay, so we're going to discuss Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It's um, a poem that is quite epic and one of the longer poems that you maybe will encounter. But it sort of gives a story of this sea voyage that goes poorly for the sailors involved, and in particular this ancient mariner, the mariner in the title. So we have this voyage at sea and all the things that can go wrong on this adventurous sea voyage. So the sailors will face the conditions of the natural world that will challenge them, and they'll face, thirst and, dehydration and no food and the elements of nature. So they'll really be tested in their endurance, and we'll see that there's only one single survivor from this voyage. And what I want us to concentrate on is the meaning ascribed to the natural world and the symbolism of the albatross. So an albatross is a large seabird, kind of like a seagull, but it's often taken as to be a good omen. So if you see an albatross, it's viewed as something fortuitous, or it's a lucky charm. So we'll see how this plays out in the poem. And I've linked to a YouTube sort of reading of the poem. Some of the language is a little difficult and old-fashioned, so if you find it too difficult to just read it on your own, I would recommend watching the videos and having sort of some visuals to go along with your reading. And it kind of helps to understand some of what's going on if you don't understand every single word, maybe, in the poem. So it does have a kind of old-fashioned language that it uses that might be a little bit difficult, but we'll kind of talk about the poem in each of its parts, but I do recommend the videos as well. So if you want to take a little time in between each part and watch the video, break it up that way, that might be a good idea. So some of the key terms that are going to be sort of prominent in this, our discussion of this poem. There's going to be a framing story and an inset story. So that's one idea. For a framing story, this is what takes place at the beginning and end of a poem or of a narrative. And it gives a sort of setup for a circumstance where a story is going to be told. So it's sort of like a frame, a picture frame that goes around the inside story. So a framing story in this case is going to be this ancient mariner stopping a young man who's just part of a bridal party. So he's part of this wedding party. All these guests come out of the church, and he's one of the guests, and then he's stopped by this very old man who starts telling him this story. And that's the basic framing story, is an old man talking to a young man and telling his story. The inset story, that's the part of, in this case, the ancient mariner, the old man. It's his story of survival at sea, and what the circumstances were that led to him being lost at sea, and everything that all the events that transpired while he was at sea. So that makes up the inset story. Some other key terms, just in terms of context, this poem was written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and he is a romantic poet. So poets that are associated with the romantic movement, and these are poets sort of sort of related to the Romantic period or Romantic movement that occurred in the latter half of the 18th century. And Romanticism, it's not about love and, romantic stuff that we think of nowadays in terms of, love and relationships and, hearts and flowers and all that kind of stuff. When we're talking about capital R, romantic, it's all about this movement in culture and society where you had artists, romantic artists who were drawing inspiration from the natural world, and they all sort of shared a similar sort of aesthetic, and they all wrote poetry, or they all sort of became a kind of movement, artistic movement in at this time period. So they all had these common, themes or ideas in their works. So Coleridge and, you know, um, Keats and Yeats and all these sort of poets that are associated with the Romantic movement, they all had this thing in common where they were drawing inspiration from the natural world, and they really viewed nature as being almost like a spiritual force that could take your consciousness to the next level. So it's sort of this level of appreciation for the natural world, so for nature, and how that could, elevate your way of thinking. So if you're thinking about, if you're a poet or a writer, these guys would, or men and women would go out into nature, and then that's where they would feel the greatest inspiration, and they would, want to remove themselves from the hustle and bustle of city life, and take up a very kind of rustic, as close to nature as possible, and that would help them sort of appreciate life more and really see that all of nature is really God's creation, and it was something beautiful that should be appreciated and taken care of. So in a way, it's sort of almost like, a modern day environmentalist or something like that. That's how I sort of think about it now. But these were, poets and artists of this period who really found the natural world very inspiring. And then there's also this idea of the sublime in nature. And this is the view that nature is a very powerful force that brings us strong feelings. So it can evoke very strong feelings in humankind. So in some cases, nature can inspire, feelings such as, you're in awe of how big or how beautiful or how it makes us feel small or insignificant. So sublime aspects of nature include things like any sort of part of nature that really makes us feel small or insignificant. So you can imagine yourself going and visiting the Pacific Ocean for the first time and seeing how vast or how big that spectacle is, and then you feel sort of very small in relation to that. Or if you look at the Grand Canyon, something, or even a mountain or something like that, where it makes you feel small or insignificant, and that's sort of the emotions, the sublimeness of nature makes us feel these strong emotions. So nature is something that moves us, inspires us, and is very powerful. So in most cases, we say that, there is this conflict between, humankind and nature, with humankind, often taking nature for granted, trying to control it, trying to dominate it, and then, it's never a fair fight, right? Nature seems to always win in the end, and we'll see that in this poem as well. So some of the guiding questions that are going to frame our discussion of the poem. So these are the ones that I do want you to be able to answer by the time you complete your reading of the poem. So why does the ancient mariner shoot the albatross? There's a lot of different reasons that you can come up with, but we'll talk about a couple of them. What are the mariner's punishments? What are the forces of nature that the mariner and the sailors have to contend with? What are the religious and or spiritual allegories of the poem or the narrative? And what is the moral of this poem? What is the mariner trying to teach others through his narrative? Okay, so let's start, and we'll look at part one first and try to answer the question of why maybe the mariner shoots the albatross. So the poem starts out, it is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three by thy long grained beard and glittering eye. Now wherefore stopp'st thou me? So in this first part, we understand that this is an old man, an ancient, he's old, mariner. So he's, a sailor, basically. And he stops one of three. So there's three people walking. He stops one of them. And the mariner is characterized by his long gray beard, and he's got this glittering twinkle in his eye that is almost magnetic, right? It really draws the attention of those people walking by. The bridegroom's doors are open, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set. Mayest hear the merry din. He holds him with his skinny hand. There was a ship, quoth he. Hold off, unhand me, grey beard loon. Eftsoons his hand dropped he. He holds him with his glittering eye. The wedding guest stood still and listens with like a 3-year-old. The mariner hath his will. The wedding guest sat on a stone. He cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on the ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. So it's this old man, the ancient mariner, stopping this young man, and this young man has been at a wedding, and it's just he's a wedding guest, and it's this glittering eye of this old man that catches his attention, and he can't help himself, but he listens like a 3-year-old child. So that's sort of where it's going. And he calls the ancient mariner Greybeard Loon. So he thinks it's just this crazy man who's accosting him on the street, and he says, get lost. But he can't help but listen. So there's something almost magical or magnetic about this old man that stops him. And even though he doesn't want to, he feels compelled to stop and listen to this man's story. So this next part, you'll notice there's a little quotation mark there. So this would be the inset story. So this is where the mariner begins talking. So he says, the ship was cheered, the harbor cleared, merrily did we drop. So there's kind of a shift in of perspective and the speaker. So this is the mariner, the old man, talking now. That first part was the framing story. This is the inset story. So this is where the mariner is going to give us his tale of what happened. And you'll notice there's a lot of personification, a lot of poetic language being used. There'll be similes and metaphors and personification, especially in nature. So the sun will be described as a person, the moon will be a person, the ship will be a woman. So there's all these sort of giving sort of human characteristics to things that are inanimate or non-human. For example, the sun came up upon the left, out of the sea came he. So just using the pronoun he to describe the sun, that would be an example of personification. And you'll notice there's a lot of imagery and interesting language used to describe nature. So that's going to be something that you can concentrate on. But for our reading, what will benefit you most is to pay attention to any language that relates to animals or creatures or anything non-human that's alive and is part of nature. So we'll just go on. Keep reading part one. So the mariner is talking about this sea voyage that he was on, and he talks about this storm that came upon them, and the storm again is personified as tyrannous and strong. So they're being chased by this storm. It's causing all kinds of problems, when they're on a ship, so it's very sort of precarious. And there was ice all around them. So he has a nice description. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. So here we have ice being personified. So nature, in this case, the icy formations all around them, is being given almost animal-like characteristics here. So it growled and roared and howled. And then they come across an albatross. So this is the large seabird that is often taken to be a good omen, so a lucky charm. And you'll notice that it's referred to as a Christian soul. So there are sort of going to be these hints of some religious imagery, religious connotations, and it can, in fact, the whole poem can be read as kind of a religious allegory. So the mariner describes how this ship came across an albatross, and it brought them good weather, good luck. So at length did cross an albatross throughout the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul, we hailed it in God's name. It ate the food it near it had eat, and round it flew. The ice did splint with a thunder fit. The helmsman steered us through. So they were kind of stuck in ice. Their path, it was a storm, and they were stuck in the ice. And then here comes the albatross, this lucky omen, and it helps break up the ice. So almost like a lucky charm, the ice breaks, and they're able to steer through all of the ice and get out of this precarious situation. And then a good breeze springs up behind the albatross, and they're able to follow it. And every day it comes to visit the men at sea, and it just seems to be there almost like a friend, helping them, visiting them, and it's almost like their lucky charm. So it brings kind of a good luck and good weather along with it. And then at the very end of that part one, he says, God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why lookest thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. So this mariner, he's telling us the story where he was lost at sea, the bird came and visited them, and then he shot the bird. We don't really know why. There's a lot of inexplicable reasons that you can kind of read into maybe why, but for the most part, it was a friendly bird, and it was an innocent soul, a Christian soul, so it's sort of has a symbolic meaning of innocence, or a spiritual sense even. And then he kills it. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of reasoning why he might do that, but we can kind of read into it. So what is Coleridge kind of trying to symbolize by having this innocent creature's life taken in a kind of brutal, almost, random act of the mariner killing it? So a couple different reasons. So why does he shoot the albatross? Well, in one reading you could say that he just does it because he can. This is an act that shows his superiority even arrogance. There's this idea that man is more superior than nature or wants to prove or control nature in some way. And this is his way of conquering, dominating the natural world by killing this bird. The second reason, he doesn't appreciate nature at all at this point. And this is a sort of transformation of his character across the poem. At this early point, he doesn't appreciate nature, he takes it for granted. He just is doing it for sport. He sees this bird flying around, shoots it, no big deal, right? So he doesn't appreciate what the gifts are of the natural world. It could also signify that maybe he's spiritually disconnected from nature, or from even, in a religious sense, he's spiritually disconnected from the what the albatross represents. So he wants to conquer nature. He wants to turn the bird from something unknown into something knowable. So he wants to kind of conquer and control whatever this bird represents, and make it just an object, whereas before it was, something alive and had integrity and was beautiful, and even maybe had some power over him, or freedom from him, and then he makes it into an object, objectifies it, and it just becomes this, dead body in his possession. And then, yeah, again reiterating the fact that, for this mariner at this point in his life, he feels that animals or nature are insignificant, and he doesn't value them. So he's trying to control nature or conquer it by killing it.